Chapter 7 The Living Soul. Begin all acts and thinking by using Al-Kalim the All. Tablet 26 The Mind. 19 times 12 equals 228. Lo, O Nuwarpians, I am about to take you on a journey of overstanding. One of the best gifts that has been given to your species is that of the mind. The mind is neither visible nor tangible. It exists not in the physical body, as does the brain, but in the spiritual plane, or what's called the mental plane. Its magnitude cannot be measured, for it carries all feelings, ideas and impressions from life, as well as the intuitive knowledge of what is to come. It is the mind that must be controlled and corralled in order to achieve that true peace of union. The mind acts justly to its desires, and it does not care about consequence. It thinks of some pleasant looking or pleasant tasting food, and then you must have some. When warned of the poisons it contains, the reaction is to disregard the warning, and you find some excuse and you eat it anyway. However, the self, which is pure consciousness, it is beyond the mind, which is read from the mental. It is the witness of all that is perceived, the plane of truth, and about it, the plane of reality. It neither acts or reacts, for the actions and reactions take place in the mind, which receives its info from the mental reservoir, appearing and arriving as thought waves to the mind. Thought, the most powerful force in the universe, initiates all action in the brain. Activity carried out on Nasut, the physical plane, in which he abode, is only a mirror of the inner workings of the mind. That which is assumed to be the reality, the physical environment in which each person lives, is only a projection of the mind. In truth, when the many mental modifications are resisted, one is no longer affected by the comings and goings of the world, and self shines forth in undisturbed purity. When the thought waves are still, the perceiver rests in his or her own true nature. The state of pure consciousness is achieved when the mind is no longer modified by the activities of thought waves. When the waves of the lake are still, one can see the bottom clearly. Likewise, when the thought waves of the mind subside, one's essential nature becomes evident. With the surrender of the ego, the individual becomes an instrument in the hands of El-Elo, the Most High. He or she takes neither credit nor blame for his or her own actions, for El-Elo does the action. The devotee thinks of nothing but El-Elo, the Most High, and El-Elo, the Most High, is his or her constant thought wave, and he fills every mental space. Control of the mind and annihilation of the ego are essential of all spiritual disciplines, including emotional ones. Even on an essentially emotional path, the intellect must not be neglected. If it is disregarded, one can degenerate into fanaticism. If, on the other hand, it is transcended, the devotee experiences the highest state of supreme devotional ecstasy. Your motivation should be the simplest desire, to love, to serve El-Elo, the Most High. Only with this attitude will the ego disappear. One cannot attain liberation until all desires, including spiritual desire itself, has been burned. Pure peace is devoid of desire, ignorance and emotions. Pure love is love, united by lust, and it is difficult to develop. Encompassing a pure desire to touch and embrace his or her physical and astral form. This is encountered frequently in the poetry and writings of the ancient and mystic order of Melchizedek, the true mystic. If one Enoshite calls another a fool, it is only a verbalization, a vibration in the air, but what a thundering thought waves it creates. One simple unreal word wreaks havoc, throwing the physical and emotional bodies into chaos, destroying all happiness and peace. One is not a fool because he or she is called a fool. If a person were called a donkey, he or she would not grow long ears and a tail. Yet, it is not unusual for people to react in anger to such statements, and in the process, it actually gives validity to them. The mind attributes meaning to words, by which the delicate degree of difference of the words are perceived by any of the senses, or by the mind, giving them a false reality. Such reactions to meaningless vibrations is the cause of countless human troubles. Overreaction to words and jumping to conclusions are weaknesses of the mind. The thought waves must be restrained at all times. One must be particularly wary of praise, for it too is verbal delusion, and the ego is ever ready to pounce on any opportunity to see itself as better or different from others. Not everyone is going to feel the same way as one who bestows a compliment. Inevitably, the pendulum swings in the other direction, and criticism will be heard sooner or later. But true happiness should not rest on praise or abuse, for in all conditions, your true essence is beyond qualities and beyond change. Just as water may become steam or ice, it still remains its underlying essence. The weaker a person is, the less restraints he or she has over verbal essence. Then the mind is not concentrated, and the perceiver identifies with its modification. Then thought waves arise, and there is an immediate tendency to identify with it. The thought wave spawns a host of others. The mind is a slave to its preoccupations, identifying with the same problem wherever it is. Again, the thought waves give rise to countless others, all in search of happiness. But in fact, it is only foolishness, for the very rising of the thoughts themselves destroys the peace that the mind craves. It is said there are 5 types of thought waves, when in actuality there is 7. Some of which are painful, and some of which are not. The 7 kinds of thought waves are right knowledge, erroneous overstanding, verbal delusion, sleep, memory, correct perception and interference. Competent testimony are proofs of correct knowledge. Right knowledge, that is knowledge based on facts, can be proven in 3 ways, but none of the proofs may contradict one another. Examine yourself the next time you are angry or miserable. Reason it out, and note the modification of the mind. Gaining freedom from verbal delusion is essential for strengthening the mind. This is the wisdom. I am a student of a great teacher. Alright, put this in your heart. It is wisdom that I give you. I am the student of a great teacher. I walk with the teacher. I talk with the teacher. I learn from the teacher. And of course, I learn to love the teacher. Eventually, an enemy comes and kills the teacher, correct? And it transforms me from a student to a revengeful man, and I get a new attribute. I want revenge on the man or thing that killed my teacher. I set out on a journey throughout the world, seeking out the man who killed my teacher. I'm motivated by that purpose. I am going to kill the man because they killed my teacher. That's why I'm doing it. I'm not a killer by nature. Why will you kill this man? Because they killed my teacher, and that is my reason. That's my sole reason. So after long hunts and travels and pursuits, I finally corner this man, and I look him straight in the eyes as I take out my sword. The man has terror in his eyes because he knows how close he is to death, and as I raise my sword, I get the satisfaction of being able to end this quest and relieve myself of this anger towards this man who killed my teacher. And that is the reason why I'm going to kill this man. That is the only reason. The man, in fright and terror, hocks and spits in my face. What do I do now? Should I walk away? If so, you say I pursued this man for 30 years and finally I've cornered him. The man who killed my teacher, he cut off my source of divinity or my connection with the divine, and I want to kill him for that purpose only, because he has interfered with my journey. What do I do when he hocks and spits in my face? What do you say? Thank you? Yes, you say thank you. What do you thank him for? Because you have another reason to kill him. If you kill him on behalf of yourself and not your teacher, you will be a killer and not an avenger. That's a thought. You have another reason to kill him. Something made you realize that it's stupid chasing him, to kill him just for spitting in your face. How did he make you realize that it's stupid? What do you do when this man hocks and spit in your face now? You've already got your sword out. You're ready to chop his head off because he killed your teacher and he cut off your source of divinity. Now he has the audacity to spit in your face. Do you kill him? Why would you kill him? Why wouldn't you walk away? I would walk away. Walking away would be right, but you don't know why you are right, and that makes it wrong. You are right. Just say I walk away. I took my sword and I put it away and I turned around and walked away. That's right. But you have to know why you're right, otherwise it's wrong. You don't understand. The reason why it's right is because my reason for pursuing this man all these years is because he killed my teacher, not because he spit in my face. I would have to leave this man and go back to where I started and regroup the reasoning, and now pursue him because he spat in my face. Otherwise, if I kill him, I become a killer for the wrong reasons. Thus, my justifications defeat themselves. The wisdom in all of this is once a holy Enoshite was insulted in front of their disciple by a non-believer who spat spat in their face several times. Not one muscle twitched, nor did his calm facial expression change, because he did not identify with his physical sheath. His mind was centered in El-Elo, the Most High. Can you imagine the strength of that mind? No matter what was done to him, he responded with one thought, that of pure love. A true Allahum will not react in anger, for to them, insult and praise are the same. Restraint of thought waves does not mean suppression. Suppression jams up violent emotions. For various reasons, people abuse, suppressing anger or pain by smiling and carrying a stiff upper lip. The restrained thought waves must be given an outlet. They must be sublimated and channeled into such uplifting activities such as chanting, repetition, exercise, singing and meditation on opposite and positive thoughts. Tablet 27. Exchange anger for love and sorrow for joy. 19 times 2 equals 38. Lo, a change in character occurs only through formation of new habits. Control can be gained by non-attachment or by eliminating emotional reactions to situations and individuals. Non-attachment does not mean that there should not be love or compassion, but rather that emotional thought waves are ignored. The thought waves may arise, but they are observed in a disinterested fashion, then put aside. Non-attachment is a state of mind. It is indifferent of objects of the world. It involves being unaffected by the pulls of likes and dislikes. Whenever the mind acquires a taste for a particular sensation or pleasure, it becomes attached to it. The mind recalls the experience and desires repetition of it. It is this craving that creates pain. Non-attachment does not necessarily mean the cessation of life in society. It involves separating oneself from the binding emotions of that life. Renunciation is a great aid to the attainment of non-attachment. By giving up objects to the senses, the mind is quickly stilled, but it is best to remember that non-attachment is not synonymous with not having. One can own nothing and yet be full of desires. If a person is fond of cherry ice cream, binding their hands and taping his or her mouth will not keep their mind from dwelling on this treat. The basis of non-attachment is the internal realization of the worthlessness of the external world. Objects and desires then automatically fall away, but renunciation does not mean running away from society, duties and responsibilities as is sometimes assumed. It means carrying on with one's duties in a dispassionate and unattached way. The more you want, the less you get. Those that must have, they are never really satisfied. Desire is the lead to suffering. Take less and don't be obligated. Care for your mate not to the point that you are falling in love and hard to live with. Things will happen with or without you, so you don't have to be a part of it all. That does not mean you should not be part of it. It just means you don't necessarily have to be a part. This world is temporary. Don't need it, or you will be bound to it all, and it never really gives. Tablet 28. Power, knowledge and control. 19 times 1 equals 19. Lo, Enoshites, knowledge of something not only gives control over it, but over those who have no knowledge of it. One buys a certain brand of toothpaste in preference to another out of ignorance. The advertisers know human weakness. They claim that one brand has more sex appeal than another, and they play on the weaknesses of the mind. Everybody manipulates power in this way. Politicians concentrate their energies on outwitting each other and the public. They come up with such slogans as law and order and peace with honor, and they bombard the public with their energy in order to control the mass mind. Some yogis and swamis use such simple, silly tricks and devices, such as using tiger skins to capture one's imagination and hence the mind. If the mind can be tricked, it can be controlled. Laboratory experimentation is in fact scientific meditation. When the scientist discovers what has caused a certain mysterious disease, he or she will then have a basis for a cure. There are principalities in high places trying to discover the secrets of nature in order to manipulate and control nature's energies. Tablet 29. Purification and spiritual practice. 19 times 9 equals 171. Lo, Nuwarpians, I am about to take you on a journey to learning the importance of purification and spiritual practice. You must always remember that you must always take care of your spirit, and the first step is taking care of your physical body, which houses the spirit. 3 basic steps involved in spiritual practice are severely simple living, self-study, surrender to El-Elo the Most High. Austerity does not mean physical abuse or severe rigors. It refers to strict control for the senses in order to conserve energy for higher pursuits. Austerity in this sense means fasting occasionally, rising earlier instead of sleeping late, and reducing certain physical comforts for the sake of greater control of the mind. What keeps the mind flowing in the desired direction? Surrendering to El-Elo, the Most High's will. One also surrenders the fruits of work performed. This is selfless, where one regards oneself as the instrument of El-Elo, and it serves humanity with no thought of either credit or blame. El-Elo does not work for you, he works with you. Ignorance is the unawareness of reality. You can't really ignore a talking and moving person. It is identification with the temporal world rather than with the imperishable self. Egoism is the I-ness and the minus, which creates the illusion that the physical body is the real you. Likes, dislikes, when a person is swayed by feelings of attraction and aversion. He or she is identifying with the material world, and he is setting himself and herself up for pain of loss and disappointment. Fear of death or clinging to life is binding and stiffening. No one can say when death will come. Fear of death is useless imagination, a waste of energy, and it creates waves of pain, which exist only in the mind. Ignorance is the cause of the above-mentioned afflictions, which follow it, whether they be latent or weak, suppressed or aggravated. The suffering which comes from egoism, attractions, repulsions, and fear of death all stem from ignorance, regardless of the degree in which they manifest. As the root of all other obstacles, ignorance of the true nature of the self is the identification with the body and mind. When ignorance is replaced by enlightenment, all other causes of pain automatically disappears. When in a state of ignorance, if an Enoshite mistakes what is mundane for what is supreme, he or she cannot differentiate between that which will bring him pain to the mind and body and that which will bring him immortality. Egoism is manifest when the individual cannot distinguish themselves from their senses and mind. He or she sees themselves as separate from the rest of the Enoshites, reacting to others with a sense of competition rather than cooperation. Attraction is that which dwells on pleasure. Most think of attraction and pleasure as positive things, but when associated with objects of the material world, they inevitably bring pain. Nothing in the physical world is permanent, hence the constant fear of loss, and the loss itself keeps those seeking pleasure in an unhappy state. This is why the spiritual person learns to cultivate a dislike of worldly pleasures. In the event, he or she is never disappointed or unhappy. The result, ironically, is that by not seeking pleasure, they are always happy. Just as attraction brings pain, so does aversion. The mental attitude of aversion is a negative one, and it often makes a neutral situation appear as if it were one to be avoided. It is not possible to avoid all distasteful circumstances. When there are likes and dislikes, a person cannot be happy. He or she is dwelling on illusory pairs of opposites, rather than learning to be content in all situations and surrendering to El-Elo's plan for his or her growth. Fear of death is the continuous desire to live, which is rooted even in the minds of the wise. The fear of death is the fear of the loss of identity, of letting go of the ego. Even when all else is given up, there is still the clinging to life. When these various afflictions are a minor distraction to the aspirant, they can be merged back into their cause by substituting the opposite mental modifications. For example, if egotistical thoughts arise, they can be combated by focusing on the all, and you bring a part of a much greater love. If feelings of attraction or avoidance enter the mind, then contentment or acceptance can be substituted. If the afflictions are overt and there is a great distraction to the mind, they can be alleviated through regular meditation and prayer. The law of fate states that the very action brings about an equal and opposite reaction. Whatever is done to others will return to the doer, and most people are continuously creating new fatal situations. This is due to ignorance and its accompanying afflictions. Before final emancipation, all debts of fate must be worked out, whether one decides to do so in the present life or in the form of hell or on lower planes, which are referred to as hell. Each must reap what he or she sows. Various life experiences are due to the situations of fate that has earned him or her by his or her thoughts, words and deeds. They have pleasure or pain as their fruit, according to whether there is virtue or vice. Overstanding this, the spiritual person strives to do only agreeable actions, and to accept peacefully the ill that comes his or her way, so that his or her seeds of fate are burned, and no new ones are sown. Violence to others, whether in thought or word or deed, must be avoided. Non-injury means more than refraining from inflicting physical pain. Mental pain can be far more devastating. When one is established in complete harmlessness, even wild animals will approach in peace. The function of truth is to maintain harmony through trust. It is better to be silent than to tell a truth that will cause pain or that springs from wrong motive. A truthful person has power, for what he or she says comes to pass, and his or her words become law. Cleanliness also extends to the mind. Only when the mind is purified of all things can it be a pure mirror for clear reflections. Laughter comes from stimulation, but a smile comes from inner peacefulness. Satisfied with itself, the mind needs nothing else for its contentment, which grows in proportion to the awareness of the inner self. The mind should not be affected by external objects. They may be possessed, but with detachment. Do not let them possess the mind. Austerity means curtailing the insatiable demands of the senses. Drink water instead of bad drinks. Practice silence instead of talking loud. Control greed. Counteract sleep by getting up early. When the mind learns that its demands for pleasure will not be met through the senses, it stops its useless wandering and turns inward. Control of the senses clears the way for such powers as telepathy and clairvoyance. Study of spiritual works and the holy tablets helps to keep the person on the right path. The book alone, however, can only take one so far, and it can lead to intellectual pride. Surrender to the will of El-Elo the Most High is necessary, for ultimately everything depends on His grace. When negative or harmful thoughts disturb the mind, they can be overcome by constant pondering over their opposites. One must be ever alert, always watching the mind. When useless thought waves arise, immediately replace them with positive thoughts, thus creating new mental habits that are conducive to spiritual growth. Negative thoughts and emotions such as violence, whether committed, abetted or caused through greed, anger or delusion, and whether present in mild, medium or great intensity, result in endless pain and ignorance. Thus, there is a necessity for pondering over the opposites. All thoughts, emotions and actions that are in opposition to righteousness bring about the fate of further pain and ignorance. This is true whether the action is actually carried out, remains in thought form, or is incited in others. Whatever the cause, whatever the degree of involvement, fate is still incurred. This is why it is necessary to substitute positive subliminal thoughts the moment negative ones are caught arising in the mind. One who is firmly rooted in non-violence, this radiates this conviction to others. He or she is so powerful that not even violent thoughts can exist in his or her presence. The more a spiritual person flees from material objects, the more they seem to come to the Yaa-Nun. The purpose of this natural law is twofold. The first is so that he or she may be tested and confirmed in his or her renunciation. The second is so that he or she as a wise person may appropriately dispense the wealth to benefit another. An Yaa-Nun is ever searching for happiness in external objects, but it can only be attained when the mind is satisfied with what has been allotted to it and is no longer looking for the attainment. When the mind is stilled and contented, happiness is automatic. When austerity's self-imposed disciplines are practiced, great will is developed, and the abilities of his or her physical body and senses are extended beyond what is considered normal. Only by surrendering one's will, one's ego, one's life to El-Elo is the superconscious state attained. The reality of an object is due to the uniqueness of change. Each object on the material plane can be identified and called a reality because it is made up of its own unique combination of the three primary colors, red, yellow and blue. An object is not dependent on one's mind, for it still exists whether or not it is perceived by that mind. The soul absorbs all of the changes through in which the mind goes because it is the external witness. All true knowledge exists permanently in the self, while the mind is constantly being modified by thought waves. The mind is something that can be observed as an object, and not the source of knowledge, just as Kingu, or called Sheski, and Luna, which you call the moon, is not the source of light, but a reflection of Shemesh, the sun's light. The mind cannot perceive two things at once. Even though thoughts are formed in a split second, still only one thought form exists in the mind at a time, so it is impossible for the mind to perceive itself while it perceives something else. If one mind could perceive another, then there would be cognition, awareness of cognition, as well as confusion of memory.